The knife was at Matthew Boone's throat before he even saw the blade move. "You will not touch him," Murex Stormbound said, and her voice carried across the frozen trading post square like a hammer striking iron. She stood between Matthew and the three bounty men who had cornered him against the ice-slicked wall of the Frostgate trading post, her massive frame blocking their path, one hand gripping the collar of the lead man's coat, the other holding her curved tusk blade steady against his cheek. "He has a price on his head, orc," the bounty man spat, though his voice wavered. 300 silver marks for Matthew Boone, wanted for the theft of the Asheville horn. "He is under my protection," Murex said, "and I have killed better men than you for less insult." Matthew Boone, half frozen and bleeding from a cut above his eye where one of them had struck him with a rifle stock, stared up at the orc woman who had appeared from nowhere to save his life. He did not know her. He had never seen her before this frozen morning in Frostgate, the northernmost outpost in the territory, where the wind screamed down from the mountain passes and the sun barely rose above the horizon before sinking again into an endless blue-gray dusk. "I did not steal the horn," Matthew managed to say, his breath fogging in the bitter air. "I found it. There is a difference." "Tell that to the men who will hang you," the bounty man snarled, but he was already backing away, his companions retreating with him, eyes fixed on the orc woman's blade and the promise of violence in her stance. When they were gone, swallowed by the maze of frost-rimed stalls and canvas awnings that made up the trading post, Murex Stormbound sheathed her blade and looked down at Matthew Boone with eyes the color of storm clouds. "You are the one they call the Horn Thief," she said. It was not a question. "I am the one who is going to freeze to death if I stand here much longer," Matthew said, and to his own surprise, he found himself smiling despite the blood on his face and the price on his head. "Thank you for that. Whatever comes next." She studied him for a long moment, as if deciding something important, and then she turned and walked away into the snow without another word, leaving Matthew Boone standing alone, his heart pounding harder than it had any right to. He was a bounty hunter by trade, one of the few who worked the frozen borderlands between the human territories and the orc clan holds, tracking men who thought the deep winter would hide them from justice. He had a stubborn streak of conscience that had cost him more coin than he cared to admit, because Matthew Boone would not bring in a man he believed innocent, and he would not let an innocent man hang simply because the bounty paper said otherwise. It was why he had few friends among the Guild of Hunters, and why he had spent the last 3 winters mostly alone, riding the mountain roads with only his horse and his rifle for company. Now he was the hunted. The Asheville horn, a relic sacred to both the orc clans and the old human temples, had gone missing from the shrine at Ravensbridge Pass, and somehow the guild had decided Matthew Boone, who had simply been passing through on a different job entirely, was the thief. He had not stolen it. He had, in fact, found it half buried in the snow near the shrine's broken wall, clearly discarded by whoever had actually taken it, and he had picked it up meaning to return it to the shrine's keeper. Before he could, the guild's men had found him with it in his saddlebag, and the accusation had followed him ever since, 300 silver marks growing heavier on his head with every passing week. He found a room at the Frostgate Inn, a low stone building with a roof heavy with snow and a fire that never quite drove out the cold, and he spent the evening nursing his wounds and wondering who the orc woman had been and why she had intervened. He did not have to wonder long. She found him the next morning, sitting alone at the inn's long table, and she sat down across from him without asking permission, setting a battered leather satchel on the wood between them. She wore fitted travel leathers the color of dark rust, cinched tight at the waist with a wide belt studded with iron rivets, the leather molded close to broad shoulders, and a powerful frame that spoke of a life spent in battle rather than idleness. Her dark hair was bound back in a thick braid threaded with small bones and beads that clicked softly when she moved, and her tusks, small and neat compared to some of her kin, gleamed pale against her green-gray skin. She was, Matthew thought, the most striking woman he had ever seen, and he was entirely unprepared for the way she looked at him now, direct and unblinking, as though she were measuring him for something. "You carry the horned scent," she said without preamble. "Faint, but there. I tracked it here from Ravensbridge." Matthew set down his spoon. "I found it in the snow. I did not steal it. I was going to return it to the shrine keeper before the guild's men found me first." "I believe you," Murex said, and something in Matthew's chest loosened at the simplicity of it. "Most people do not. Most people are fools." She leaned forward slightly, and Matthew caught the scent of wood smoke and cold pine that clung to her. "The Asheville horn is sacred to my clan. It was taken from the shrine by men who mean to sell it to the highest bidder, or worse, to use it to stir war between your people and mine. I have hunted its trail for 2 weeks. You are the closest thing to a clue I have found." "Then we want the same thing," Matthew said slowly. "You want the horn back. I want to clear my name and stop being hunted by every bounty man in 3 territories." "Yes," Murex said. "So we are allies for now, until the horn is found." She said it like a fact already decided, and Matthew found he had no argument against it, nor did he particularly want one. They set out together the next morning, riding north along the frozen trade road toward Ravensbridge Pass, where the trail had gone cold. The sun rose late and weak over the mountains, casting long blue shadows across the snow, and Matthew found himself stealing glances at the orc woman riding beside him, unable to quite believe his fortune in having such a formidable ally at his side, even as a distant, foolish part of him wished for something more than alliance. The wind was a living thing on the pass road, howling down from the peaks with a fury that made conversation nearly impossible, and so they rode mostly in silence for the first hours, Matthew's horse struggling in the deeper drifts, while Murex's shaggy mountain pony seemed entirely unbothered by the cold. It was near midday when the wolves came. They came from the tree line in a gray rush, 6 of them, starved and desperate in the deep winter, and Matthew's horse reared in terror, throwing him hard into a snowbank. He came up gasping, reaching for his rifle, but the weapon had tumbled from its saddle sheath and lay half-buried yards away. A wolf lunged for his throat, and Matthew threw up his arm on instinct, felt teeth graze his sleeve, and then the weight was gone, torn away by a force that sent it tumbling through the snow. Murex Stormbound stood over him, her tusk blade dark with blood, her braid whipping in the wind as she turned to meet the next wolf's charge head-on, catching it by the scruff and driving her knee into its ribs before flinging it aside. She fought like something out of an old saga, Matthew thought dazedly, watching from the snow as she dispatched 2 more wolves with brutal efficiency, her movements economical and sure, never wasting a strike. When it was over, 4 wolves lay dead in the snow and the remaining 2 had fled back into the trees. Murex turned to him, breathing hard blood on her hands that was not her own, and extended one to help him up. "You are unharmed?" she asked. "Because of you." Matthew took her hand and let her pull him to his feet, and for a moment they stood close together in the ringing silence after violence, her hand still wrapped around his, and neither of them moved to let go. "You did not have to do that." "I did," Murex said simply. "You are useful to me," and she added almost reluctantly, "I did not wish to see you harmed." She released his hand then, and busied herself with wiping her blade clean in the snow. But Matthew had seen something in her eyes in that moment that he could not quite name, and it stayed with him for the rest of the day's ride, warm against the bitter cold. They reached the ruins of the old watchtower above Ravensbridge Pass as the light was failing, and made camp in its lee, sheltered from the worst of the wind. Matthew built a fire while Murex scouted the perimeter, and when she returned, satisfied they were alone, she settled across the flames from him and regarded him with that same measuring look. "Tell me about yourself, Matthew Boone," she said. "If we are to hunt together, I would know what manner of man I hunt beside." "There is not much to tell," he said, though he found himself wanting to tell her anyway. "I grew up on a farm in the southern valleys. My family died of the fever when I was 17. I have been on my own since, mostly. Bounty work pays well enough when I take the jobs other hunters will not touch because the target might actually be innocent. He shrugged, staring into the fire. I do not have much of a name in the guild, just a reputation for being difficult. Difficult, Murak repeated, and something like amusement flickered across her sharp features. I think you mean honorable. Honorable does not pay for boots. No, she agreed, but it is worth more than boots. They sat in silence for a while after that, the fire crackling between them, and Matthew found himself studying her face in the flickering light, the strong lines of her jaw, the fierce intelligence in her storm-gray eyes, and he thought, not for the first time that day, that he had never met anyone like her, and that some part of him did not want this journey to end. "What of you?" he asked finally. "Why does the Asheville horn matter so much to you? You said it was sacred to your clan, but you hunted alone. Where is the rest of your clan?" Something shifted in Murak's expression, a shadow passing behind her eyes. "My clan is the stormbound clan of the Northern Holds. I was wife to their war chief, Gorath Ironhide, before he fell in the border skirmish 3 winters past." Her voice was steady, but Matthew heard the old grief beneath it, worn smooth by time but never fully healed. "Since his death, I have led our warriors in his place, though the clan elders grow restless with a woman at the head of the spear. The horn is proof of our clan's old alliance with the human temples, a symbol that keeps the peace between us. If it is lost, or worse, if it is used by those who mean to break that peace, my clan will suffer for it. So will yours." "I am sorry," Matthew said quietly, "for your husband. He died well in battle, as our people believe is right." Murak's gaze met his across the fire. "But I have carried the weight of his clan alone since, and it grows heavier with each season. I did not expect to speak of this to a human bounty hunter I met 2 days past. I did not expect to be trusted with it," Matthew admitted. "But I am glad you told me." She held his gaze a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and Matthew felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. And then she looked away, back into the fire, and the moment passed, though it did not entirely fade. They found the trail the next day. Hoofprints leading off the main road into a narrow canyon that cut through the mountains toward the abandoned mining settlement of Grimsdale, long since stripped of its silver and left to the wind and the wolves. "It was there," Murak said, sniffing at the cold air like a hound on a scent, "that the trail of the horned thieves grew strong again." They approached the settlement carefully, leaving their mounts tethered in a stand of pines a half-mile back, and crept through the ruined streets on foot, past collapsed buildings and rusted mining equipment half buried in drift snow. It was Matthew who spotted the smoke first, a thin gray thread rising from the chimney of the old assay office, the only building in Grimsdale that still had its roof intact. "There," he whispered, and Murak nodded, already moving low and silent toward the building's rear wall. Inside, through a gap in the shuttered window, they could see 4 men gathered around a table, and on that table, wrapped in oilcloth but unmistakable in its curved shape, lay the Asheville horn. "4 of them," Murak murmured. "I can take them." "We can take them," Matthew corrected. "I did not come all this way to watch." She glanced at him, something like respect flickering in her eyes, and did not argue. The plan, such as it was, fell apart the moment Matthew's boot cracked a frozen board on the porch step, and the men inside were up and armed before he and Murak had even cleared the door. What followed was chaos, a blur of drawn blades and Matthew's rifle discharging into the low rafters, of Murak stormbound moving through the room like a force of nature, disarming one man with a twist of his wrist that made him scream, driving her shoulder into another, and sending him crashing through the old assay counter. Matthew grappled with a third man near the table, and it was only when he glanced up, breathless, that he saw the 4th man had grabbed the horn and was fleeing through the back door into the settlement's ruined streets. "He is getting away with it," Matthew shouted, and Murak, finishing off her opponent with a blow that left him crumpled against the wall, was already moving. Matthew broke free of his own struggle and followed her out into the snow, and together they gave chase through the abandoned streets of Grimsdale, past collapsed roofs and snow-drifted alleys, until they cornered the thief against the crumbling wall of the old smelting house. He turned, desperate, and Matthew saw with a cold shock that he held a small crossbow, already drawn, aimed not at Murak, whose size and evident danger made her the obvious threat, but at Matthew himself, the easier target. Boone! Murak's voice was sharp with warning, and then she moved, faster than Matthew had thought anyone her size could move, throwing herself between him and the loosed bolt. It struck her in the shoulder and she staggered, but did not fall, and in the same motion she closed the distance and struck the thief a single, brutal blow that ended the fight entirely. Murak! Matthew was at her side in an instant, catching her as she swayed, his hands finding the bolt embedded in her shoulder, blood already staining the dark leather of her jerkin. "You are hit. Why did you do that?" "Because you would have died," she said through gritted teeth, "and I did not wish that. You could have died instead." "I am harder to kill than you," she said, and there was a ghost of dark humor in it despite the pain evident in her voice. "Now stop fussing and help me sit down before I fall down." He helped her to a low stone wall, and with hands that shook more than he wanted to admit, he examined the wound. The bolt had struck the meat of her shoulder, missing bone, and though it bled freely, he did not think it was fatal. Still, his heart hammered with a fear that surprised him in its intensity. "I need to get this out and bind it," he said. "This is going to hurt. I have endured worse." "That does not mean it will not hurt." She met his eyes, and something passed between them, warm and fragile in the bitter cold. "Then hurt me, Matthew Boone, I trust your hands." The words settled into him like a brand, and he worked as carefully and quickly as he could, drawing the bolt free while she gripped his forearm hard enough to bruise, her breath hissing between clenched teeth, and then binding the wound with strips torn from his own shirt. When it was done, she was pale beneath her green-gray skin, but steady, and she looked at him with an expression he had not seen from her before, something softer beneath the warrior's steel. "You did not have to throw yourself in front of that bolt for me," Matthew said quietly, still kneeling before her in the snow. "I am just a bounty hunter with a price on his own head, hardly worth the risk." "You are worth more than you know," Murak said, and reached out with her uninjured arm to touch his jaw, her thumb brushing along the line of his cheekbone in a gesture so unexpectedly tender that Matthew forgot, for a long moment, to breathe. "I have fought beside many warriors, Matthew Boone. I have never fought beside one who thought of others before himself in the way you did back there, going after that man when you could have let me handle it alone." "I could not let you face that alone," he said. "Not when I had a choice." "No," she agreed softly, "neither could I." They retrieved the Asheville horn from the ruined smelting house, along with a letter they found on one of the fallen thieves, a letter that named their employer as a merchant lord in the southern city of Caldreth, who had been planning to sell the relic to rival warbands in the eastern hills, hoping to spark conflict between the orc clans that would drive up prices for weapons and mercenary contracts. It was proof enough, Murak said, to clear Matthew's name and expose the true scope of the theft. But that proof would have to wait, because Murak's wound, though not fatal, left her weak from blood loss and the cold, and they were forced to shelter in Grimsdale's abandoned assay office for 2 days while she recovered enough strength to travel. Those 2 days changed everything between them. Matthew tended her wound morning and night, and in the long hours between they talked, truly talked, in a way that stripped away the careful distance they had maintained since Frostgate. Murak told him of her youth in the northern holds, of the husband she had loved and lost, of the weight of leading a clan that whispered behind her back that a woman, even a widow of the war chief, had no place holding the spear. Matthew told her of his lonely years on the Bounty Trail, of the farm he had lost, the family he still grieved, the way he had never quite found a place he belonged. "You do not seem like a woman who needs anyone's approval to lead," Matthew said on the second night, as they sat close together by the small fire he had built in the assay office's cold hearth. "You fought 4 men without hesitation. You took a crossbow bolt for a man you had known only a handful of days. I do not think there is much you fear." "There is one thing," Murex said quietly, staring into the flames. "I fear being alone forever. My husband is 3 winters dead, and every season the elders press me to remarry, to secure alliance, to prove my worth through a new bride price bond with some clan chief's son who cares nothing for me and everything for the warriors I command." She turned to look at him, and there was rawness in her gray eyes that she rarely allowed to show. "I have refused them all. I would rather lead alone than bind myself to a man who sees me only as a prize or a political asset." "You deserve more than that," Matthew said, and meant it with his whole chest. "I have begun to think," Murex said slowly, "that I deserve someone who would look at me the way you have looked at me since Frostgate. Someone who sees me, not the widow of a war chief, not a prize to be bartered, but Murex." Her hand found his in the firelight, her calloused fingers lacing through his. "Do you understand what I am telling you, Matthew Boone?" His heart was pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it. "I think I do, but I am afraid to hope I am understanding it correctly." "Then let me be plainer," she said, and closed the distance between them, her free hand coming up to cradle his jaw, and she kissed him, fierce and certain, with none of the hesitation he might have expected from a woman speaking of fear only moments before. Matthew's hands rose to her waist, uncertain at first and then sure, and he kissed her back with all the longing he had been trying to bury since the moment she had first stood between him and 3 armed men in the snow. When they finally parted, breathless, Murex's eyes were bright with something fierce and warm. "I have wanted to do that since the wolves," she admitted. "I have simply been waiting to be certain you wanted it too." "I have wanted it since you put a knife to that man's throat and told him you would kill him for touching me," Matthew said, and she laughed, low and genuine, a sound he decided he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn again and again. They did not rush what came after. Murex's shoulder still needed to heal, and there was a horn to return, a name to clear, and a corrupt merchant lord to expose. But in the quiet hours of those 2 days in the ruined assay office, they built something between them that neither the cold nor the danger still ahead could diminish. And when they finally rode out of Grimsdale toward Ravensbridge Pass, it was no longer merely as allies. They reached Ravensbridge Pass 3 days later, the Asheville horn wrapped carefully in oilcloth in Murex's saddlebag, and the shrine keeper, an old human priest named Elder Fenwick who had known Matthew's family in his youth, wept openly when they placed the relic back upon its altar. "I never believed you took it, Matthew Boone," the old man said, gripping his hands tightly. "But I could not stop the guild from posting the bounty once the merchant lord's men spread word of your presence here. You have my testimony now, and the letter you found. It should be enough to clear your name before the guild council." It took another 2 weeks of travel to Caldrith, where Matthew presented the letter and the priest's sworn testimony to the Bounty Guild's council, along with Murex Stormbound standing at his side, her presence alone silencing any guild member who might have doubted a mere human's word. The merchant lord who had orchestrated the theft was exposed and arrested before the council's eyes, his scheme to incite war between the clans laid bare, and Matthew Boone's bounty was struck from the record entirely, the 300 silver marks replaced instead with a formal apology and a modest reward for the relic's safe return. It should have been the end of the danger. It was not. Word of the merchant lord's arrest spread through the border territories like wildfire, and with it came an uglier truth that even Murex had not anticipated. The merchant lord had not acted alone. His scheme had been backed by a faction within the orc clans themselves, warriors who believed war with the humans was inevitable and sought to hasten it for their own gain, and chief among them was a warband leader named Crathger Bloodfang, a name Murex spoke with unmistakable venom. "Crathger has coveted my husband's seat since before Goreth fell," she told Matthew as they rode north again, back toward Frostgate, where word had reached them that Crathger's warband had gathered near the Stormbound clan's own territory. "He has long wished to see me disgraced or dead, that he might claim leadership of the clan through conquest rather than blood right. If he learns I aided in exposing the merchant lord's plot, and that I have taken a human as my companion, he will use it against me before the elders. He will call me a traitor to my own people. Then we will face him together, Matthew said, without hesitation, and Murak looked at him with an expression that made his chest ache with tenderness. You do not have to walk into that danger, Matthew Boone. Hrothgar's warband would see a human at my side as provocation enough for violence. I did not walk away from 4 wolves and 4 thieves, Matthew said. I am not walking away from this. They reached the storm-bound clan's war camp 3 days later, a sprawling collection of hide tents and cook fires nestled in a wide valley beneath the northern peaks, smoke rising from dozens of fires into the gray winter sky. It was, Matthew thought, both beautiful and formidable, a village built for both survival and war, and the moment their party was spotted by the camp's outer sentries, word spread fast that the widow of Goreth Ironhide had returned, and that she brought a human with her. The reception was not warm. Warriors gathered as they rode into the camp's central clearing, faces hard with suspicion, and Matthew felt the weight of dozens of hostile stares settle on him like a physical burden. Murak rode tall and unbowed beside him, her chin high, and when Hrothgar Bloodfang himself emerged from the largest tent, flanked by his own warriors, the tension in the clearing sharpened into something that felt dangerously close to violence. Hrothgar was a huge orc, taller even than Murak, his tusks filed to points, his arms crossed with heavy iron bands that spoke of trophies taken in battle. He looked at Matthew with open contempt, and then at Murak with something colder still. "You bring a human filth into our war camp, widow," Hrothgar said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Have you forgotten yourself so completely, or does grief finally make you as weak as the elders whisper? I bring the man who helped me recover the Asheville horn and expose the plot that would have started a war neither of our peoples could survive," Murak said, her voice hard as flint. "I bring proof, Hrothgar, that your ally the merchant lord conspired to burn our alliance to ash for coin, proof that I have here in writing, sworn by human priest and guild alike." Murmurs rippled through the gathered warriors, and Hrothgar's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something like alarm before hardening again. "Lies," he spat. "Human lies, meant to shame our clan and elevate this widow above her station. Then let the elders judge the truth of it," Murak said, "as is our way." It was a challenge Hrothgar could not easily refuse without appearing to fear the truth himself, and so the clan elders were summoned, gray-haired orcs whose word carried the true weight of law within the storm-bound clan. And in the flickering light of the central fire that evening, with the entire war camp gathered to watch, Murak Stormbound laid out the evidence of the merchant lord's plot, the letter naming Hrothgar's own war band as intended beneficiaries of a war stoked for profit. The revelation, when it came, struck the gathered clan like a physical blow. Hrothgar Bloodfang, the great war band leader who postured as the clan's true protector against human treachery, stood exposed before his own people as a man who had conspired with human criminals to shed orc blood for his own advancement, willing to see warriors die in a war he had helped manufacture merely to seize power from a widow he considered beneath him. "This is treachery beyond forgiveness," the eldest of the clan elders declared, her voice carrying grim finality across the silent camp. "Hrothgar Bloodfang, you have plotted against your own clan's survival for the sake of ambition. You are stripped of your warband's command and cast out from storm-bound lands, never to return." Hrothgar's face contorted with fury, and for a moment Matthew thought he might draw his blade despite the elder's judgment, might try to fight his way free of the disgrace closing around him. But the warriors who had followed him, faced with proof of his betrayal, stepped back one by one, leaving him alone and exposed before the fire. He was disarmed and marched from the camp before the night was through, his name cursed by the very people who had once followed him into battle, and Murak Stormbound stood vindicated before her clan, her leadership secured not by the strength of her sword alone, but by the truth she had carried across the frozen wilderness to protect them. It was, Matthew realized as he watched her stand tall before her people, the most dangerous moment of their journey, more dangerous even than the wolves or the thieves, because it had threatened not her body but everything she had built and protected since her husband's death. And she had faced it without flinching, and he had stood at her side through all of it, and when it was over, and the fire had burned low, and the camp had begun to settle into an uneasy but relieved quiet, Murak came to find him where he sat alone near the edge of the clearing. "You did not have to stand beside me through that," she said, settling down next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Hrothgar's warriors could have turned on you the moment the accusation was made." "I told you already," Matthew said. "I am not walking away from you, Murak stormbound. Not for wolves, not for thieves, and certainly not for an orc with filed tusks and a grudge." She laughed at that, warm and unguarded, and leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the stars wheeled slowly overhead, the danger finally, truly behind them. But even as one danger passed, Matthew began to understand that a different kind of challenge was only beginning, one that had nothing to do with thieves or traitors, and everything to do with the growing certainty in his chest that he did not want to spend another season of his life without this woman beside him. They remained in the storm-bound war camp through the deepest part of winter, the long nights stretching endlessly under a sky heavy with stars. And in that time Matthew found himself woven, slowly, and without quite realizing how it happened, into the fabric of clan life. He helped mend saddle leather and repair broken spear shafts, sat at the great fire in the evenings listening to the clan's old stories told in a tongue he was slowly learning to understand, and earned, through patience and quiet effort rather than any grand gesture, the grudging respect of warriors who had eyed him with suspicion on his arrival. It was not always easy. There were those in the clan who still muttered that a human had no place among them, who blamed his kind for old wars and older grievances, and Matthew bore their coldness with the same quiet patience he brought to everything, never rising to anger, never demanding acceptance he had not yet earned. Murak watched this with something like fierce pride, and more than once she made her displeasure with the coldest of her clanmates known in ways that left no doubt where her loyalties lay. It was on one such evening, when a young warrior named Drago made a cutting remark about human weakness within earshot of them both, that Matthew saw the full measure of Murak's devotion laid bare for the entire camp to witness. "Say that again," Murak said, rising from the fire with slow, deliberate menace, "and see how weak this human's protector proves to be, Drago." The young warrior paled and stammered an apology, and the camp fell silent, watching the widow of Goreth Ironhide defend a human bounty hunter with the same fierce protectiveness she might once have shown her own husband. And something shifted in the collective understanding of the clan that night, a recognition that whatever bond existed between Murak Stormbound and this quiet human man was not a passing curiosity, but something with roots too deep to easily dismiss. Afterward, when they walked together away from the fire toward the edge of the camp, Matthew took her hand. "You did not need to threaten him on my behalf," he said, though there was no real complaint in it. "I know," Murak said. "I wish to anyway. There is a particular satisfaction in it, Matthew Boone, in making clear to my own people that you belong to me, and I to you, and that any insult to you is an insult to me that I will not suffer lightly." "Is that what I am to you?" Matthew asked, half teasing, though his heart beat faster waiting for her answer. "Something that belongs to you." Murak stopped walking and turned to face him fully, the stars bright and cold overhead, her breath fogging in the frigid air between them. "You are the only thing I have wanted for myself entirely since my husband died," she said, and her voice had lost all its usual sharpness, laid bare and honest in a way that made Matthew's throat tight. "Not for the clan, not for alliance or duty, for myself, Matthew Boone. Is that too bold a thing to say to you?" "No," Matthew said, drawing her close, his hands finding the small of her back beneath her heavy fur cloak. "It is exactly the thing I have been hoping to hear and been too afraid to ask for." She kissed him then beneath the vast winter sky, with none of the hesitation of their first kiss in the ruined assay office, but with the certainty of something long decided, and Matthew felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, entirely and completely wanted. 3 days later, Murak came to find him at midday, while he sat mending a torn strap of harness leather outside the small tent that had become, unofficially, his own within the camp's boundaries. She was dressed still in her fitted rust-colored travel leathers, though she had added a heavy fur mantle against the day's biting cold, and she carried herself with an unusual formality that made Matthew set aside his work immediately, sensing something important in her manner. "Matthew Boone," she said, and her voice, though steady, carried a note of nervousness he had rarely heard from her. "I wish to speak with you of something serious, and I would have you hear me out fully before you answer." "Of course," he said, rising to his feet, "whatever it is." "Among my people," Murak began, "when a warrior wishes to take a mate, tradition demands a bride price be offered, a gift of significant value given from the one who seeks the bond to the one they wish to claim, as proof of their worth and their commitment. Typically it is the man who offers such a price to the woman's clan or the woman's family, seeking her hand." She paused, and Matthew saw her throat move as she swallowed. "But I am a widow and clan leader in my own right, and I have decided that I will not wait for the old customs to dictate how I claim what I want. I have decided, Matthew Boone, that I wish to offer the bride price to you." Matthew's heart stopped, then hammered forward with sudden, dizzying force. "Murak, let me finish," she said, though there was warmth beneath the firmness. "I have gathered together the finest offering I am able to give, Gorath's own war spear, passed down through 3 generations of storm-bound war chiefs, forged of northern steel and etched with the victories of our clan. A pouch of silver marks, more than enough to buy land or livestock should you wish it, gathered from my own portion of the clan's tribute. And the deed to a homestead along the southern border of our territory, a place of good grazing land and clean water, that we might build a life there together, between your world and mine." She held out a bundle wrapped in dyed leather, containing, Matthew understood, all of these things, offered with both hands, her gray eyes steady on his face despite the vulnerability evident in the offering itself. "This is my bride price to you, Matthew Boone. I am asking you to be my mate, before my clan and whatever remains of yours, if you will have me." Matthew stared at the bundle in her hands, at the spear haft visible where the leather wrapping had loosened, at the weight of history and wealth and trust she was offering him, and he felt something rise in his chest that was not simple joy but a complicated, aching tenderness, because he understood in that moment exactly what such a gift would mean, and exactly why he could not accept it as given. "Murak," he said slowly, "do you know what people will say if you give a human bounty hunter your husband's war spear? If word spreads that the widow of Gorath Ironhide gave away clan treasure and silver and land to a man with no name, no clan, no warrior's honor to match against it?" "I care nothing for what they will say," Murak said, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face at his hesitation. "I have already faced down Crathger's treachery before this entire clan. I do not fear gossip." "I know you do not," Matthew said gently, "but I am not asking because I fear for you. I am asking because I do not want you to give me something that costs you a piece of your husband's memory or a piece of your clan's trust, simply to prove to me, or to anyone else, what I already know without any of it." He reached out and gently pushed the bundle back toward her, his hands closing over hers around the wrapped spear. "I do not want Gorath's spear, Murak. I do not want your silver or your land. Keep them. They are yours, earned through years of leading this clan, through grief you have carried alone. I will not be the reason you give any part of that away." Murak's expression shifted, confusion and something like hurt flickering across her sharp features. "You refuse me." "I refuse the price," Matthew said quickly, urgently. "Not you, never you." He released her hands and reached instead into the small leather pouch he wore at his own belt. the one that held the few possessions he had carried with him through every bounty job, every lonely winter on the trail. His fingers closed around something small, and he drew it out, holding it up in the pale daylight for her to see. It was a ring, simple and unadorned, carved from a single piece of pale mountain bone, no wider than a finger's breadth, with a small, plain knot worked into its surface where the bone had been shaped and smoothed by careful hands. "This was my mother's," Matthew said, his voice rough with an emotion he did not try to hide. "She carved it herself, from the bone of the first deer my father brought down after they were wed, back before I was born, back before the fever took them both. It is not silver. It is not steel forged through generations of victory. It is not land or wealth or anything a clan elder would call a worthy bride price for a woman like you." He held it out to her, his hand steady despite the pounding of his heart. "But it is the truest thing I own, Murak Stormbound. It is the only thing I have that means what I want it to mean, which is simply this. I do not need to buy you or prove myself worthy of you through gold or steel. I only wish to give you what is truly mine to give, however small, and ask if you will take it anyway, not because tradition demands it, but because you might want it for exactly what it is." The clearing had gone quiet around them. Matthew realized distantly that several clan members had gathered nearby, drawn by the sight of the widow's public offering, and now stood watching in hushed silence as the exchange unfolded. But he did not look away from Murak's face, waiting, his whole heart laid bare in his outstretched hand. Murak Stormbound looked at the small bone ring for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and Matthew felt a spike of fear that he had misjudged everything, that his refusal of her grand offering had wounded her in some way he had not intended, that his small, humble gift would be seen as an insult rather than the honest truth he meant it to be. Then, without a word, she reached out and took the ring from his palm. She did not speak. She simply closed her fingers around the small carved bone, and then slowly, deliberately, before her clan and before Matthew Boone himself, she slid it onto her finger where it settled, small and pale against her green-gray skin, utterly plain beside the iron bands and carved bone jewelry the clan warriors typically wore. And yet, in that moment, it seemed to Matthew the most precious thing in the entire camp. The silence stretched and then broke, as Murak finally looked up and met his eyes, and there were tears there unshed but bright, that Matthew had never once seen from this fierce, unbreakable woman through wolves and thieves and traitorous warband leaders. "You understood," she said, her voice thick, "exactly what I needed, when I did not know I needed anything different from what tradition demanded. You offered me something smaller than any bride price I have ever known, Matthew Boone, and it is worth more to me than every spear and silver mark my clan possesses." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them entirely, and cupped his face in both hands. "I accept you. Not because of what you have given, but because of what you refused to take and what you gave instead. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "I think I do," Matthew said, his own voice unsteady now, "but I would very much like you to say it plainly anyway." "I love you," Murak said, simply and fiercely, loud enough that the watching clan members could hear every word. "I have loved you since the wolves, Matthew Boone, since you went back for your rifle instead of running, since you took a bolt's binding into your own hands and did not flinch from my pain. I love you, and I will have no other mate, bride price or none, spear or bone, for as long as I live." "I love you too," Matthew said, and it came out rough with feeling, entirely undone by being wanted so completely, so openly, by a woman who could have chosen absolutely anyone, and had chosen him instead, again and again, from the very first moment. "I have loved you since you put a blade to a man's throat over me and told him he would not touch me. I did not think I would ever be loved like this, Murak. I did not let myself hope for it." "Then stop hoping," Murak said, a fierce, joyful smile breaking across her face, "and simply believe it because it is already true, and it will remain true for as long as either of us draws breath." She kissed him then, in front of the entire gathered clan, unashamed and certain, and the small crowd that had gathered erupted into a mixture of astonished murmurs, and from a few of the warriors who had come to respect Matthew's quiet steadiness over the preceding weeks, genuine cheers, and Matthew Boone understood, in that moment, that whatever prejudice and distance had once stood between his world and hers had not vanished entirely, but had been overcome, at least here, at least between the two of them, by something far stronger than tradition or fear. The clan elders, when informed of the exchange, were divided in their reaction. Some scandalized that their widowed leader had bypassed the traditional bride price entirely in favor of a token gift from a human man of no standing. Others quietly moved by the sincerity of it, in a way that traditional wealth had never managed to convey. But Murak Stormbound was clan leader in her own right, her position secured beyond question by her role in exposing Crathker's treachery, and she made clear, in no uncertain terms, that her choice of mate was hers alone to make, and that any elder who wished to challenge it was welcome to face her in the dueling circle to make their case. None did. Spring came slowly to the northern territories, the deep snows receding by inches, the frozen rivers cracking and running free again beneath pale sunlight that grew a little stronger with each passing week. It was in this season of thaw that the Stormbound clan gathered for the binding rite that would formally join Murak Stormbound to Matthew Boone before witnesses from both her clan, and, in a gesture that would have seemed impossible only months before, a handful of human traders and travelers from Frostgate who had come to know and respect the bounty hunter with the stubborn conscience during his months among the orcs. The rite was held in the open, in the wide clearing where the clan's great fire burned, beneath a sky finally clear of winter's endless gray. The mountains still snow-capped, but the valley floor showing the first green shoots of new grass pushing up through melting drifts. The entire clan gathered in a wide circle, warriors and elders and children alike, and beside them stood the small contingent of humans, Elder Fenwick the shrine keeper among them, come north at Matthew's invitation to witness a joining that blurred the old lines between their two peoples in a way few had thought possible in their lifetimes. Murak Stormbound stood at the center of that circle in her familiar rust-colored travel leathers, though today they had been oiled and polished until the leather gleamed richly in the sunlight. Her dark hair, unbound for the occasion and falling loose past her shoulders, threaded through with fresh spring flowers gathered by the clan's younger warriors in her honor. She looked, Matthew thought as he watched her from across the circle, more beautiful than he had ever seen her, not because of any ornament or ceremony, but because of the open, unguarded joy written plainly across her sharp, striking features. The clan's eldest elder, the same gray-haired orc woman who had passed judgment on Crathker's treachery months before, stood at the circle's edge to oversee the rite, and she raised her voice now to address the gathered witnesses. "It is the oldest custom of our people," the elder said, "that when a warrior wishes to claim a mate before the clan, she kneels before them and before all witnesses, and speaks the binding words that cannot be unspoken. This rite has not been performed by a clan leader in 3 generations, for it is a claiming meant to show that the one who kneels does so not from weakness, but from a strength so certain it fears no vulnerability. Murak Stormbound, widow of Goreth Ironhide, leader of the Stormbound clan, do you choose to perform this rite?" "I do," Murak said, her voice ringing clear and steady across the silent clearing. She turned to face Matthew, who stood waiting at the circle's edge, his heart hammering so loudly he was certain the entire clan could hear it, and she crossed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps, the morning sunlight catching in her dark hair, the small bone ring visible on her finger where she had worn it every day since the moment he had given it to her. And then, before the entire assembled clan, before the human witnesses who had traveled so far to see it, before the mountains and the thawing valley and the wide northern sky itself, Murak Stormbound, war widow, clan leader, fiercest warrior Matthew Boone had ever known, knelt down before him in the new spring grass. A ripple of astonished murmurs passed through the gathered orcs, for this was no small thing, no idle gesture. A clan leader kneeling before any other soul, let alone a human man with no clan or spear right of his own, was a claiming so absolute, so total in its surrender of pride to devotion, that Matthew felt tears rise unbidden to his own eyes at the sight of it. "Matthew Boone," Murex said, kneeling before him with her hands open, palms upward, the ancient posture of offering rather than command. "I claim you before my clan, before your people, before the sky and the mountains and every spirit of my ancestors who watches this rite. I claim you not as prize, nor as bride-price bond, nor as political alliance, but as the mate my heart has chosen freely above all others, for as long as I draw breath. You refused the wealth I offered and gave me instead the truest thing you owned. And in doing so, you taught me that love need not be measured in silver or steel to be worthy of a clan leader's claiming. I kneel before you now, Matthew Boone, not because I am weak, but because there is no strength in all the northern holds I would not lay down at your feet gladly for the rest of my days. Will you have me as I have you?" Matthew's voice, when he finally found it, was thick with emotion he made no effort to hide. "I will have you, Murex Stormbound," he said, and knelt down before her in turn, so that they knelt together in the grass, hands clasped, foreheads touching, the entire watching world reduced for that single moment to only the two of them. "I have been alone most of my life, Murex. I never thought I would be chosen by anyone, let alone by someone like you, who could have had any warrior in any clan, any hold, any territory, and chose instead a bounty hunter with a stubborn streak and no name worth mentioning. You have made me feel wanted in a way I did not know was possible, and I will spend every day I have left proving that your choice was not misplaced." "It was never misplaced," Murex said fiercely, pulling him into an embrace that drew a fresh wave of cheers and shouts of approval from the gathered clan, human traitors and orc warriors alike lifting their voices together in a rare, unguarded moment of shared celebration that neither people's history would have predicted. "It was the truest choice I have ever made, Matthew Boone, and I do not intend to spend a single day regretting it." They rose together, hands still clasped, and the elder who had overseen the rite raised her voice once more to declare the binding complete, the clan erupting into celebration around them, drums beginning to sound, warriors clashing spear against shield in the old victory rhythm, while the human witnesses added their own cheers, and from Elder Fenwick, a blessing spoken in the old temple tongue that drew respectful silence even from the orc warriors who did not understand the words, but recognized the sincerity behind them. That evening, as the great fire blazed high into the darkening sky and the celebration continued around them, Matthew Boone found a quiet moment alone with his new mate at the edge of the clearing, away from the noise and the dancing, where the mountains rose dark and ancient against the last light of the spring evening. "I have been thinking," Murex said, leaning back against him as his arms came around her, "about the homestead I offered you as part of the bride price. The land along the southern border with the good grazing and clean water. I told you I did not want it as a price," Matthew said gently. "I know," Murex said. "But perhaps we might still build something there, not as a price paid, but as a home chosen freely by both of us together. A place that is neither fully my clan's territory nor fully human land, but something new built between the two, the way we ourselves have built something new between our two peoples." She turned in his arms to look up at him, her gray eyes warm in the firelight. "I do not wish to give up leading my clan, Matthew Boone. That duty remains mine, and I will not abandon it. But I would have a place that is ours, apart from the war camp, where we might return to each other when the season allows, a home built by our own hands rather than given as tribute or price." "I would like that very much," Matthew said, and found himself smiling at the vision of it, A life neither entirely his old lonely existence on the bounty trail nor entirely the war camp's demanding rhythms, but something entirely new, built on ground that belonged in the end only to the two of them. They built that homestead over the following months, as spring gave way to summer in the northern valley, a modest stone cottage with a sturdy roof and a wide hearth, situated on the good grazing land Murak had once offered as part of her bride price, now simply a home chosen freely by two people who had found, against every expectation either might once have held, exactly the kind of love that neither silver nor steel could ever have purchased. Matthew gave up bounty hunting entirely, though his name remained cleared and respected among the guild he had once served, and instead turned his hand to raising horses and cattle on the land he now called his own, work that suited his quiet, steady nature far better than the hunting trail ever had. Murak continued to lead her clan, riding out from their shared homestead when duty called and always returning to him, her devotion undimmed by the passing seasons, her love for him growing only deeper as they built their life together, thread by thread, season by season. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the fire burned low in their small stone cottage, Murak would sometimes catch Matthew's hand in hers and turn it over to look at the small, plain bone ring he had once given her, still worn on her finger after everything, still, to her, the truest and most precious thing she had ever been given, worth more than every spear and silver mark her clan possessed, because it had been offered not from obligation or tradition, but from a heart that had chosen, freely and completely, to give her exactly what was truly his to give. "I have never regretted refusing your bride price," Matthew told her once, on just such an evening, the two of them sitting close together before the hearth while the wind moved gently outside, no longer howling with winter's fury but soft with the promise of another season's turning. "I have never regretted a single choice I made that led me to you, Murak stormbound." "Nor I," Murak said, resting her head against his shoulder, the bone ring catching the firelight as she laced her fingers through his. "I looked for strength my whole life, Matthew Boone, in spears and silver, and the approval of warriors who valued conquest above kindness. I found something far better in a bounty hunter who refused a fortune and gave me instead the truest peace of his heart. That is a gift I will treasure until my last breath, and beyond it, if the spirits of my ancestors allow such things to follow us into whatever comes after this life." "They will allow it," Matthew said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I do not intend to let you go, Murak, not in this life or whatever comes after it." "Good," Murak said, a smile in her voice, fierce and warm and utterly certain, the smile of a woman who had faced down wolves and traitors and the weight of clan tradition itself, and had found in the end exactly the love she had refused to settle for less than. "Because I have claimed you before my entire clan, Matthew Boone, and I do not intend to release that claim, not now, not ever." Outside, the northern wind moved softly across the valley, carrying the scent of new grass and thawing earth, and inside the small stone cottage they had built together with their own hands, on land chosen freely rather than bought, Matthew Boone and Murak stormbound sat together before the fire, wrapped in a love that neither prejudice nor tradition nor the hardship of their rugged world had managed to diminish, a love built not on the weight of gold or steel, but on the far rarer and far more precious foundation of being truly, completely seen and chosen, exactly as they were, by exactly the person who mattered most.